10 takeaways. Top 10 takeaways preseason edition, training camp edition, and injury edition. That's right. We're going to talk about injuries, injury recovery with my man Deepak. He's here. Welcome. This is my first guest in the history of the top 10 takeaways.
Wow, that's an honor. Thank you for having me.
This wasn't even my idea. This was Theo Greminger's idea, our head of content. He was like, you got to have Deepak on. Deepak Chona, he's going to come in. You can see he's a sports med analytics expert. It's in neon lights right behind him.
Yes, sir. That's what we're here for.
That's right. And so we got to bring him on and talk about all the players that are injured or they're recovering from injury or whatever it is. And actually, the first player I want to talk to you about is not actually injured at all. But I thought he was. I had a heart attack yesterday. And speaking of Theo, he did the thing that I despise. He did the thing that I really frown upon. And that's just a naked, contextless DM, text, whatever it is. Oh no, Rashod White. Right, that's what he sent me. He's like, oh no, Rashod White. And I was like, well, what do you mean, oh no? Or it was like, oh, Rashod White. Like, oh, good? Oh, bad? Oh my God, Rashod White. OMG, Rashod White. Oh my God, did he have a breakaway run? Oh my God, is he hurt? What does OMG, Rashod White fucking mean, Theo? You're killing me, buddy. Killing me. And then I'm frantically searching. Then all of a sudden we have Rick Stroud from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the beat reporter's like, he went down in a heap, crumpled in a non-contact injury, limped off the field. And I'm like, no, we can't have nice things. The Podfather curse continues. Building drafts around this guy as a 0 RB anchor. It would have just destroyed those teams. We were so invested in this guy, way overweight on him. We are the most bullish in the industry on it. Other than R.C. Fisher, who thinks he's better than Bijan Robinson. We're not going there, of course, but we are, higher than everybody else, with the exception of R.C. Fisher. So can you explain what happened? Because today he's back at practice. He's going through drills. He's explosive. He's jumping. He's running. He's cutting. He's fine. He's tweeting that he's fine. What happened?
Yeah, so scary injury. The description in the video, it looked like, oh boy, that could be an ACL when you hear of a non-contact or a buckle, anything like that. And then, of course, the limp right afterwards. To me, it all is a very reassuring picture, as you mentioned. The immediate post injury, what you would notice is some swelling, and if there doesn't have any swelling, it means inside the knee is very likely fine. And I think that's why they were able to return him so quickly, reassure everybody so quickly as well. But you're completely right to be concerned when a guy goes down like that with a reported buckle. The buckle usually means ACL, maybe meniscus. So we lucked out on Rashod White this time.
What happened, though? What do you think happened?
It's one of those things where when you're in the action as an NFL player, you feel your knee buckle and there is some give to a normal knee, and you feel that sort of give moment, and that is enough, I think, mentally to scare people. And it's probably happened to most people who played sports at any level, that you think you're injured for a second, you get up, you walk a little better than you thought, and then you have to get checked out, because at that point, especially in the NFL, they're not letting him back on if he's got a potential injury. So then it starts this whole process of, okay, I'm out, I'm going to get checked out, I got to do the whole 9 yards before saying, okay, I'm actually just fine.
So we had a superstar breakout in preseason named A.T. Perry, and A.T. Perry's a player that we've been bullish on. We talked about with R.C. Fisher. Again, R.C. Fisher, super bullish. I mean, we're not as bullish on A.T. Perry as R.C. Fisher. We don't have him as a top 5 receiver. But of all the day 3 receivers, A.T. Perry has a phenomenal prospect profile, the most underrated wide receiver from the NFL draft because he slipped to the 6th round, didn't make any sense. Now he's on the Saints, And we're way out ahead on A.T. Perry. We're like, well, you need to be drafting this guy in the 5th round of your rookie drafts. Make sure after Michael Wilson's gone, after running backs like Evan Hull and some of these attractive day 3 backup running backs with all-purpose skill sets, once they're off the board, even like a Dwayne McBride, he's not an all-purpose back, but he's a phenomenal between the tackles runner. Once those players are off the board, round 5 in rookie drafts is interesting, especially if it's non-superflex. I mean, you start to dig real deep into the running back, into the wide receiver positions, and there's A.T. Perry. And then to go out and have like 6 catches and look phenomenal, that was a big deal. Like, that's really good news. A.T. Perry's putting up 6 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown, working with the ones. And then I know Nate Liss is going on Twitter and being like, I hate to tell you guys, but, preseason doesn't matter. And if you're changing dynasty rankings based on preseason, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, hey, don't look at me, buddy. I didn't change a thing. We've just been way out ahead on A.T. Perry, and we're not sorry about it. And one of the reasons why is that Michael Thomas has barely played football in years. So talking to you, he's had this full reconstruction of the foot ankle area. And we know he's not the same guy because he's also 30 years old at this point. So he's a 30-year-old who's played just a handful of games the last 3 years. And he's had that full reconstruction. He's had revision surgeries. How do you evaluate Michael Thomas's foot and ankle, and at what percentage do you think he's going to be playing at in terms of his prior pre-injury explosiveness, flexibility, all those things?
Right. It's a really good question. Michael Thomas is one of those guys that has missed a lot of time, but if you look at his injuries a little more closely, it's not as concerning as the number of games missed would suggest. So specifically, we go back to what was originally a high ankle that he tried to treat non-operatively. That caused him then, when he came to training camp and it wasn't quite right and ended up needing surgery, that caused him to miss basically a year and a half or almost 2 years as a result of a single injury. But that is an injury that people do recover from well. And if you look at last year's brief window of performance, I wouldn't say he was all the way back to all pro form, but he was showing glimpses of very productive Michael Thomas. And then he had a toe injury and a dislocation. That is the type of thing that players do come back from as well. So individually, these injuries shouldn't totally derail his career and his performance. He is a very high-risk player. He is somebody who I would take as a lottery ticket and plan to have some missed games by midseason. But that's because he's had these recurrent foot and ankle surgeries. And whenever you have this type of issue, you do have a higher re-injury rate to that specific anatomic location going forward. But with that being said, he should look about 90% of where he was before last year's injury to start off this year. And that should ramp up over the course of the first 4 to 6 weeks if he can stay healthy.
So the toe dislocation is what he's currently dealing with. He's currently rehabbing, and he has been full go in camp thus far, right?
That's correct, yeah. It's still an injury that, because your toe is involved in pushing off and sort of accelerating that way, it is an injury that does tend to decrease a little bit of performance when players do come back, but not substantially. It's a probably less than 10% hit for Michael Thomas. It's just that you have to factor in that he's now age 30, and the last time we were looking at his performance, he was playing at age 27, basically.
90%. That's about as rose-colored glasses as I've heard, seen on the level of performance that Michael Thomas is going to be able to deliver compared to his prime Michael Thomas years. My biggest comp for him, my best comp for him, is actually his best comp on PlayerProfiler is also his best injury recovery comp, which is Michael Crabtree. Michael Crabtree had these recurring foot and ankle injuries. He was a phenomenal possession receiver, and the target depth just kept going down, 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 down. And eventually, by age 29, he was out of the league. And we often have this hope with these players, that they can come back. Remember Calvin Johnson?
Of course.
Foot, ankle, knocked him out of the league by age 29, right? Julio Jones, foot, ankle injuries, and then by age 32, he's a shell of himself. And as soon as he hit 30, he wasn't producing consistent fantasy points. And so now that we have Michael Thomas, it's just, I've seen this movie so many times. It's like Edge of Tomorrow, where I've seen it so many times. It's just playing in a loop in my head over and over and over and over again. I'm like, oh, another 30-year-old that's been dealing with foot and ankle problems for the last 3 years, and he's gonna, it's like one more ride, one final job, right? It's like the movie Heat, right? One final job, okay? I'm retiring. One big bank heist, and then I retire. That's how they sell it to us, right? Julio Jones and the Titans, right? One final job. And I'm like, who is falling for this?
Yeah, it's a good point. I would say to that though, I wouldn't say 90% of Michael Thomas's prime. I would say 90% of where he was in that brief window last year. So I think that was already a step down because he had missed 2 years from where Michael Thomas prime was. So I'm with you on overall. Like I'm not looking at Michael Thomas as a ceiling wide receiver one, but could he be a serviceable player in a flex role? Probably, very likely, yes.
Yeah. The yards per reception has just been in constant decline, right? 2019, 11.6. That wasn't even that good, but he was prolific, right? And then it's 11, then it's 10.7. And it's also reminiscent of another 30-year-old receiver from the previous draft class, one draft class earlier, which is Allen Robinson, right? So to me, he just doesn't have the full washed out year where he was healthy and not very productive. Super dusty, right? Healthy and dusty. He doesn't have the healthy, dusty year on his resume. We can point to and be like, okay, this guy's gone. He's over. Right? We have that with Allen Robinson. We just don't have that yet because he just hasn't been available to show us how dusty he is. So this is what Allen Robinson's going to be this year. He's going to be this possession slot receiver in Pittsburgh, and he's going to have a couple weeks, and he's going to score some touchdowns, and I think that's great for Allen Robinson, and I think that's about what you can expect from Michael Thomas. And the presence of Michael Thomas should not dissuade you from going out and picking up A.T. Perry in Dynasty, from investing in, let's say, Chris Olave first and foremost, but all members of this receiving core, right, from Juwan Johnson on down. To me, a acquisition of Michael Thomas, especially in Dynasty, is just a wasted roster spot, right? I'd rather have Rashid Shaheed, right? I'd rather have a guy that actually has upside who could be something special in a slot or stretch position where he's young, he has tantalizing athleticism that can be put to good use on an NFL football field. Michael Thomas doesn't have those things, but he is, I agree with you, going to get 90% of the snaps and targets that he did last year, and he's going to put up 50 yards a game.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable expectation, fully in line with your logic, and then add in the fact that he's very likely to miss a little bit of time here and there for some recurrence of these types of injuries now that he has this weak point we've identified.
Just a wasted pick. Waste. You're not saying it's a waste. I'm saying it's a waste.
Right.
Now, on the other end, I've heard that Matthew Stafford's dust. It's moving on from Matthew Stafford. Like, he's already dust. Like, we didn't get to see it last year because he didn't play the full year, but, trust me, he's gone, right? And what I saw last year was Matthew Stafford throwing to Cooper Kupp a lot and having success. And then I saw Cooper Kupp get injured. I saw Matthew Stafford get injured, and he has the neck, spine injury, which is always a big concern. But to me, there isn't this calendar years going by of this guy not playing. He had a neck problem Okay, it wasn't Peyton Manning level going to Germany to get spinal fusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had a neck problem. He got it addressed. He's been full go in camp. I'm not concerned that Matthew Stafford is dust. I'm not concerned this is his final year. I know this is Michael Thomas's final year. Right? So let's talk
Right.
about the Matthew Stafford injury and how you're evaluating it.
Yeah, I think I'm more in line with you on this one. The start of last year, he had this sprained ligament in his elbow. That hurts every time you throw deep and every time you throw hard, which is most NFL throws. So that probably decreased his performance at baseline throughout the year. But then you add on, he had a couple concussions. He had also, as you mentioned, the spinal cord contusion. That's very different than what Peyton Manning had. And it's almost like a bruise to the nerves, but they recover. So all of Matthew Stafford's injuries, even though it's a beast of a list, should recover well given the amount of time he's had off. So we expect Matthew Stafford to start the season looking like he did in that Super Bowl run, very strong. Now the question with Matthew Stafford for me is, yeah, he's a not super mobile pocket QB, and in our data, the health and durability of those guys is very tied to the play of their O line. That was where the Rams really failed him last year, and you're probably better equipped to answer than I am, but the Rams O line health is a little bit of stability is a little bit of a question mark there for me.
Oh yeah, it's terrifying, right? The Cooper Kupp, when healthy, is going to be force-fed targets because he's going to have no time to throw. So it's going to be Cooper Kupp on the single cut, Cooper Kupp on the double move. It's going to be Cooper Kupp, Cooper Kupp, Cooper Kupp. But the running game is not going to necessarily be there. Cam Akers is not going to be an efficient runner, though he is going to get fed. And I think that Cam Akers, how he delivers value in fantasy football is as a receiver. And then they don't have Darrell Henderson, that he's going to be catching a lot of dump offs and a lot of swing passes, and that's going to be the way that he delivers value for fantasy footballers. Now, with Matthew Stafford, you're talking about your data on mobility. Can you just talk about the sports meta analytics, like your project, your website, and the things that you do and how you deliver value for your subscribers and your users?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Sportsman Analytics, we a couple years back we formed a team. My own background is in orthopedic sports surgery, and a few years back I was in the sort of hub of technology in residency at Stanford, and I met a couple folks who were more inclined towards computer expertise, data science, and machine learning. So we combined our sort of backgrounds, if you will, and put together these extensive databases, machine learning algorithms to help inform how do players do when they get injured, and specifically the timelines that they come back from and the performance hits and time it takes them to recover, their pre-injury performance, and then also their re-injury rates or risk. So that's really what SportsMed Analytics is all about, is using data to analyze injuries for the fantasy football or sports bettor. And where we can be found is at Twitter at SportMD Analysis, but also online at sportsmedanalytics.com. So we're really interpreting this data in combination with the football and the medical context as much as possible. And we've had good success doing that, winning our own leagues with this process over the past few years, because as you know, almost every player has some level of injury impact on their performance throughout the year.
Injury alert, injury alert. Terrace Marshall has been carted off. Terrace Marshall has been carted off the field. Whenever a guy gets carted off, that's worse than limping off, right? Being helped off. The cart is not good. He went down in a heap, and he's been carted off. So he had the potential to seize this number one job. It was wide open behind, Adam Thielen as a possession receiver, maybe not going to command the same targets and reception totals as Adam Thielen, but anyone behind Adam Thielen was wide open to anyone that wants to step up. So that's unfortunate. We'll keep monitoring the situation. I don't know if there's anything that you can, any information you have on this now, but that literally happened while you were talking. while you were talking. But we gotta continue to talk about quarterbacks and quarterback elbow ligaments in particular, because there's a bunch of quarterbacks that had elbow injuries the last couple of years, and we're gonna talk more about that with Deepak after this. Hey, we've got to talk about Rival Fantasy today. Rival Fantasy, they're a huge supporter of everything we do, the podcast channel, the YouTube channel. It's possible because of Rival, and they have an incredible new offer with promo code PLAYER. Promo code PLAYER, you double your deposit up to $200, and you get $25 in bonus bucks. So it's $225 additional to play in NFL preseason. You can do their props on the fantasy book, where it's over, under, up to 5 guys. The more over-unders you hit, the higher your payout. And they have their challenges for the community. You can say, hey, I think that player X is going to go over this many fantasy points, and someone takes you up on it. They take the other side. It's great. I love their fantasy bingo, where you can do 5 across, you can do 4 in the corner, black it out, just predicting fantasy points on your favorite players, especially in preseason. The promo code is PLAYER, where they match your deposit up to $200 plus those $25 in bonus bucks. This offer is insane. Dak Prescott had an elbow injury. Remember that? Do you think with another year removed from that elbow injury, he's going to have more zip on the ball this year?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to say the elbow injury shouldn't cause a 2-year or 1.5-year performance impact. So I'm not sure that really explains last year's issue. However, he did have thumb surgery early on, and you would expect his grip strength at the very least to be affected by that last year, even despite his early return from that. So with Dak Prescott, I do think from a physical perspective, he looks better than last year to start this, but from the coaching perspective, it may hurt to lose your OC. So hard to say for me there. I'm mostly out on the Cowboys as a result of that.
Oh, he gained Brandon Cooks. I'm just looking for any reason to tout Dak Prescott right now, and what I'm hearing is good. What I'm hearing is he's having, for the first time in years, a cool, calm, healthy, event-free, injury-free preseason. Right? Every other training camp, it's
accurate.
like, oh, Hard Knocks is here, and he's got this pitching injury. It's like an injury that only pitchers get. Remember that?
Yeah,
that was
totally
terrifying, man. And then last year's the thumb surgery. It's like he's missed all of this time with the team and not been able to fully participate in training camp since 2020. And by the way, in 2020, he played 7 games. He was the QB1 in fantasy, put up 27-plus fantasy points per game. That was the last time Dak Prescott had an event-free, stress-free training camp and preseason, and I'm looking forward to that Dak Prescott showing up this year. It looks like Josh Allen has fully recovered from whatever elbow injury he suffered last year. Depending on the legend of Josh Allen, how big it gets and who you talk to, I've heard that this guy had a torn ligament and he was playing through it the whole season. Is that even possible?
Yeah, it is possible. But if you look back, when the injury occurred, the games following that, if you watch the tape, you can see he has a more overhead or vertical throwing motion. And that's because the more sidearm motion hurts this ligament more. So
Right.
he was clearly protecting it. And then you look at his QBR, it dropped by 10 points per game after the injury. And then if you look at his receivers, Stephon Diggs dropped by 40 points per game, 40 yards per game after Josh Allen's injury. So I think it very clearly hurt him. He should be fully recovered by now. That ligament's not always one that has to be reconstructed surgically. So we would expect him to be basically functionally fully healed at this point.
So you think it was a partial tear?
I would think it would be a high-grade partial tear, but obviously one you could play through, but it does impact your performance.
Now, what about Brock Purdy? Was that a full tear? Was that a complete tear? Was that like a torn UCL fully? Like Tommy John surgery?
Yes, not quite Tommy John surgery, but But
Okay.
yes, that ligament did completely tear off the bone. And if you look at that video of his injury, it's so drastic. There's no way that ligament could have been intact with the way his elbow bent back. But now, what they're commonly doing for players like a Brock Purdy, who otherwise didn't have any injury to this ligament before, is something called a repair with the internal brace. So you may be hearing that in place of your Tommy John for a lot of football quarterbacks, and that allows for a quicker recovery, more like a 4 to 6 month return rather than the Tommy John's usually a year. So if you look at
Mm.
baseball data, it's pretty favorable in terms of pitchers regaining their velocity and their control with throwing, and they actually put more stress on this ligament than Brock Purdy will. So we really expect him to look very strong like his pre-injury form.
And Trey Lance is doing himself no favors in preseason. So Trey Lance has looked awful, looked lost. It's the Brock Purdy show. That's what it's going to be. Have they developed new techniques to repair the multi-ligament knee injuries like what Javonte Williams suffered? Because it used to be you have to go in, get the ACL repaired, recover, then go in, get the MCL repaired, rehab that. Did they find a way to speed this up? Because I think he avoided the pup altogether this preseason,
Yeah,
which stunned me.
yeah, you're exactly right. It is a really stunning, but really it's a realistic goal, but it's a very impressive goal that he's met so far. If you look at the average timeline on this, it takes about 15 months for players historically to come back from this. J.K. Dobbins did it in 13. Javonte will be at 11 for week 1, but he's been sort of cleared at about 10. So that's remarkable in terms of beating the pace. Everything basically has to go smoothly. In his case, I think from his timeline, we can say pretty confidently that they did all of the surgical reconstruction at one time. But with
Oh.
with that, I would say that's more commonly the trend in these NFL guys who are looking to beat a deadline. So I think that's kind of the way things have shifted over recent years, but maybe not always has been the case.
That makes a huge difference. If they could go in and do
Right.
both repairs at once, then that would necessarily speed up your timeline. That's interesting information. That's important. That's actionable information. So he could be out there week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. The data on these is still not super promising on the early return in the sense of efficiency sees dips up to even about 20%. And the first 3 to 4 weeks from an injury like this tends to be a ramp up period for number of touches. So are you going to see the pre-injury Javonte Williams right away? Probably not. But mid-season onwards, I have a lot of optimism for Javonte.
So as early as week 5, we could see 100% Javonte Williams. He could be fully ramped up and acclimated as early as week 5.
Yeah, that's what the data says. In terms of his efficiency, it predicts more like week 8. But yes, along
But
that
he's
track for
beating
sure.
everything, man.
Right,
Deepak,
he's
he's
beating
beating
everything.
everything by months.
He really is. It's very impressive, and it's a hard guy not to root for at this point.
I love him now. I'm going to start drafting him more. This is amazing. They hit it, get it all done in one surgery. So Breece Hall, similar timeline, but it
Hmm.
almost feels like Breece Hall has had a less smooth recovery than Javonte Williams, even though he only tore the one ligament. But if you tear that one ligament and it's not as clean as Javonte Williams having 2 very clean ligament tears, then it's possible that Breece Hall's recovery could be more fraught.
Yeah, it's true. With regards to Breece Hall himself, he does. Our data predicts him as about as favorable as an analytics mold as possible in the sense that he's young. He was 21. He's an elite athlete, 95th percentile combine metrics, and he was drafted pretty high. 36 overall for a running back is quite high. So if you look at that in combination and you plug all of those factors into the data, Breece Hall projects as the type of guy who comes back strong. The average ACL causes about an 18-month performance hit. And then with Breece Hall, though, you expect him to get past that a little faster than normal. And so we have him at about 85% when he steps onto the field. When that will be is a little bit still in question. I would still lean towards it being week 1, but but it's somewhere around a 65% chance, according to historical data, that that is the case. And they're clearly going to take him along slowly, especially if they have another running back, if Dalvin Cook or somebody signs. So with Breece Hall, it's week 6 onwards. I'm very optimistic on him, looking like an RB1. That early phase is going to be a little bit subject to user impact in terms of how the Jets plan to ease him along.
Update on Terrace Marshall, an injury update. It was a front seat ride. He rode in the front seat of the cart, not in the back of the cart. That's from Dylan Gibson. He's a Carolina fan in the chat. Any thoughts on front seat versus the back seat and the bed of the cart?
Yeah, I mean, the bed's a little bit worse, I guess, but I don't think you can read a whole lot into that. You still have pretty real injuries in the front seat.
That's right. Yeah, front seat doesn't mean you're injury-free by any means. Some of these players that are getting hurt in preseason are always a concern. We haven't had the catastrophic injuries this preseason yet. We haven't had any Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, Travis Etienne's. There was one year we had all 3 in 1 year, right?
Right.
It was a June, July, August. Every month we were getting a new injury. It's like, oh, bye Cam Akers, bye Travis Etienne, bye J.K. Dobbins. This preseason and training camp, we've had a few concerning injuries, but most of them are, oh, this guy's week to week, and we believe he's probably going to be ready.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about Cooper Kupp, right? Cooper Kupp,
right?
A major hamstring strain where they had to help him off the field, and then they say he's done for the rest of preseason. You're not going to see him again, and we're hopeful he's going to be ready for week 1. I hate hearing that, but if it were during the season, they would say, oh, this guy's day to day, and then we would know he's week to week. He would end up missing 2 games and then come back, not be 100% for the 3rd game, and then after a month, he'd be back to full strength. And Cooper Kupp was injured at the very beginning of August, and that means that he can come back at full strength when the season starts. So what is your level of concern, a scale of 1 to 10, on Cooper Kupp?
On Cooper Kupp himself, about a 3. I would say there is a 15% recurrence rate. That is a little bit higher because he's in his 30s. But overall, as you said, the hamstring at this stage for a mild hamstring strain shouldn't really impact him by week 1. The key for me with Cooper Kupp is going to be Matthew Stafford.
Was it mild, though? Was it mild?
Well, so based on the timeline, they're saying he's likely returning to the field or practice in the next week to 2 weeks.
Okay.
So during season, about a mild hamstring, like a grade 1 hamstring, you look at as about a 2-week injury. And in the preseason, you add 1 to 2 weeks to it. So you would say if it takes him 4 weeks to return in the preseason and he returns well before the season starts, there's not like a pressure to bring him on early, then you would probably pretty confidently call that a grade 1, and I would say relatively mild.
That's great news. We love Cooper Kupp. I'm still drafting. I'm on Ross St. Brown over Cooper Kupp because of this injury, but it's close. It's very close. It's razor close. And I know you're concerned about Matthew Stafford and the mobility. That is going to be Matthew Stafford is terrifying with the lack of mobility and having one of the, if not the worst offensive line in the sport. He's just going to have to get rid of the ball quick, and he's going to have to get it to Cooper Kupp. That's what he's going to have to do. Kenneth Walker is already talking about returning to practice, even though he was supposed to be out a month. With Cooper Kupp, with Kenneth Walker, with a Rashod Bateman, these players force themselves back on the field because they love the sport so much. They're so passionate. They're such dogs that they cannot stay off the field. And are those some of the problems these players have? They sow the seeds of their own demise by pushing themselves too hard, too fast?
It definitely depends on the injury type. Muscle strains, things like the Cooper Kupp, the Kenneth Walker, or even the now George Kittle and Joe Burrow injuries, you don't want to see those guys rush back because they can feel pretty good and want to come back. And then the re-injury risk is higher if they rush the return. something like an ACL or a Liz Frank. So Rashad Bateman had the Liz Frank and surgery to remove the hardware afterwards. That is less concerning on an early return, but there is
Because
an
that's just like
elevated
a
injury
pain
risk.
tolerance. Like, hey, we took the screws out. It's going to be real sore there, but if you can deal with it, like it's not a structural integrity concern.
For the most part, yes. Also, there is usually a dip with people's explosiveness when they come off of the Liz Frank. So you expect Rashad Bateman to have about a 15% hit from that to start the season with a relatively quick recovery. But again, it's a different sort of issue than
I love that. I love you
returning
saying
from
that.
a muscle. Well, I'm glad to hear that,
I'm a big
but it's
Rashad
just a
Bateman
different sort
fan.
of.
You love Rashad Bateman, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love Zay Flowers more, but I do like Rashad Bateman as well.
I also love Zay Flowers. What about Odell? Like Odell, do you think he's dust?
I don't actually. Odell, I think I'm higher on than the average person here. And the reason is that the ACL, even a second ACL, performance dip for him as a really elite guy pre-injury would be an 18-month issue. He's week one will be at 19. So you anticipate Odell has actually had enough time given the year off to be pretty close to what he was before. Now, any further injury on this knee or in general to Odell's leg that could be considered a career ender potentially. So you have to be a little bit careful there. With Odell, there's also some question of was that first surgery really a normal reconstruction, or did they try a repair that didn't work essentially? So there's a couple of concerns with that, but overall, the outlook from here on is essentially not too much different than if he had a reconstruction done properly the first time.
I think he's going to have a couple weeks where he's going to have, 8, 9 targets like Michael Thomas last year. He's going to look pretty good, right? He's going to have some productive weeks, and he's likely, because of the reoccurrence risk, he's likely to have another lower body injury, and that's a wrap. That's a retirement. That's what happens, right? That's how these players retire more often than not, right?
You're not wrong. Like I said, any re-injury to that leg is should be considered a potential career ender. But at this point for Odell, we don't have sort of that overwhelming evidence to say that he can't get back to where he was in that Super Bowl, where, as you know, he looked quite good.
Yeah, no, he did look good. And at that point, though, let's say week 5, week 6, week 7, that's when Rashad Bateman's going to be fully online. Are you worried about Rashad Bateman that he's had so many of these lower body injuries for the first 3 seasons?
I'm not overly worried about Rashad Bateman. Now, in terms of his start to the year, I think it'll be a little on the slow side. But as you mentioned, week about 6 or 8 is when he projects to hit 100%. And in terms of his history, it's not uncommon to have 2 surgeries for the Liz Frank, one to fix it, one to remove the hardware. So that's really not outside of the typical issue. And then having that cortisone shot a couple months back is not ideal, not what you want to hear. It means the recovery is not going as smoothly as he wanted, but certainly doesn't mean he's going to be out or injury prone or anything like that.
Was that cortisone shot just to calm down the area where the screws were?
Yeah, very likely the tendons sometimes get irritated in that area, and sometimes underneath you get because you've had 2 surgeries. Every time you go in, there's more scar tissue that develops. So sometimes you just got to break through that phase of inflammation, and that's really what that cortisone is for, just to make him more comfortable and get him through that phase of rehab.
Did you see when he returned to the field that he hugged the field? He face planted the field and hugged the actual field. You know,
Yeah,
he loves the sport, man. He wants to be out there. He is a great player. He checks all the boxes. He was a prolific college talent. He was a lot faster, actually, than anyone expected at the combine. He was a first-round pick. He and Zay Flowers are going to be a special, special wide receiver tandem for years to come. And take the injury discount now while you can get it. Of all the players we've talked about, you don't sound overly concerned about anybody. Is there anyone you're actually that concerned about?
well, with OBJ, I think the concern is pretty real. Michael Thomas as well, that they have injuries this year caused some missed time. Uh, the guys I would say I'm lower than the rest of the community is somebody like Jonathan Taylor. Now, he had a relatively straightforward ankle surgery, so the short term impact of that isn't expected to be huge. But he's a guy who runs a lot more than he receives. And for a running back, you want that ratio flipped in order to decrease their injury risk because a carry running into usually bigger players hitting you from more chaotic positions is a higher injury risk per play than a reception, which is probably something you end up bracing more for and falling in a more favorable position.
That's right. You got more guys coming at you from angles you don't see when you're running the ball as well, instead of being out in the open field. It makes sense. I still think that his latest PUP visit was fake. I think he's fully recovered, but just more time to lift weights, right? That's what I think this is. Same thing with J.K. Dobbins.
I would agree with that.
J.K. Dobbins, like he could be back. He could be out there right now, right? These are fake PUP visits. They're not actually physically unable to perform at all. It's just they're physically unable to get the contracts they want because of the collective bargaining agreement, and that's why they're unable to practice.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with both of those. And there is some reporting out of both camps that has suggested that as well. Specifically, I saw one comment
Some
on J.K.
reporting?
Dobbins, right, that he has the type of injury that a new contract will fix. So it's pretty much hits the nail on the head right there. And he looked really good at the end of last year. J.K. Dobbins at 100 yards per game, 6.5 yards per carry. Hard to argue that he's all of a sudden been injured without any real reporting on it.
Our producer, Ross Young, is in the chat. Ross, per Deepak, J.K. Dobbins has an injury that a new contract can fix. Okay, that is a great quote that needs to go up on Twitter. Oh, yes. What about Kyler Murray? Kyler Murray has been some funny photos of Kyler wearing the catapult and with a little pot belly. It's just been funny.
Yeah.
Right? He's standing off to the side. He's just chilling, man. Like he's just vibing,
Right.
chilling, rehabbing, I guess. And then you've got Zach Ertz, where his wife was the star really for the last few months as he's been rehabbing. She's been in the World Cup and looking great. And so we have Ertz and Murray both coming back from ACL tears. Do you have any interesting nuggets regarding the Cardinals rehabs?
Yeah, for Kyler Murray, I think that's another one where I'm lower than the market on him. He does have elite athleticism, which helps to predict a faster return. But then when you look at guys coming off of an ACL surgery, having a big guaranteed contract and coming back to a really bad team, both project to lower that or increase that timeline, delay his return.
Right.
And then when you look at Kyler Murray, the other aspect
I would
is,
slow play it if it were me.
or why wouldn't you, right?
I would just
Especially
make sure.
with,
I'm like, God, I gotta get in the pool a little bit more.
yeah, totally. And then you look at performance when he does come back. So with all the data factored in, we anticipate week 8 to 12, that range for him to be ready to go. There's a large range of outcomes with him, so it's hard to really pin that down. But if you look at his production when he does come back, you pretty consistently see a decrease in the rushing for position players and for quarterbacks. And then with Kyler Murray at his size, looking over offensive linemen that are much taller, guys like Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray talk all the time about having to move around to see lanes to throw the ball between. And although we can't really quantify it, you have to wonder if his in-pocket mobility is also going to be a little bit affected when he does come back, and does that therefore affect his passing? I'm really not wanting any piece of Kyler Murray for this year, but I think the next season he looks just like he did pre-injury. So if in Dynasty, I would take the discount, but redraft, I'm passing all the way.
Yes. All these productive struggle teams, I have Kyler Murray, man. For Dynasty, wheels up in 2024 per Deepak. That's the word. I love it. And Zach Ertz, man, these guys, Odell Beckham's, the Zach Ertz, when you have the ACL reconstruction in your 30s, well, OBJ was 29. Ertz is
Hmm.
in his 30s.
Right.
How does that matter when you have a young ligament, an age 21 ligament regrowth, repair versus guys 30, 31?
Yeah, I think the youth in the data is pretty clear that the youth is a positive factor in terms of how fast the guy recovers his performance and even how fast he returns. They're saying Ertz has a good chance to play week one, and I do buy that. He'll be right around 9, 10 months, which is about average. But if you look at his comparison, I would say athletically and age-wise, the best comparison I have for him in the recent memory is Robert Woods, who had a pretty not memorable year last year coming off an ACL around the same timeline. So I'm kind of looking at that pretty real performance dip for Ertz, who's not he's a great player, but not an otherworldly athlete, and he's about 30. Bad team all around. Ertz is really a hard fade for me.
Hard fade, hard fade. Trey McBride. Trey McBride late. Deepak says Trey McBride late. That's what he's saying. That's the takeaway. Everyone's like, what are the takeaways? We've been giving you takeaways, okay? The takeaway is we're fading Michael Thomas, okay? Michael Thomas is dust. We haven't seen it exactly yet like we've seen it with Allen Robinson. That's a takeaway, man. The takeaway is that Javonte Williams is a superhero and he needs his own Marvel movie. That's the takeaway. Cooper Kupp's going to be fine. He's just going to have a lower target depth because they have no offensive line. That's the takeaway. The takeaway is you want to hoard Kyler Murray in Dynasty if you're rebuilding. That's a takeaway. You're going to run as far away as you can from Zach Ertz and get all the Trey McBride you can. That's a goddamn takeaway. Okay? And I'm telling you, my takeaway is that Dak Prescott's have the least eventful training camp and preseason since his epic 2020 season, and you need to draft him. Now, another takeaway, I think we're almost to 10. If you want one more, another one, this is where we had other takeaways that we've even talked about, like Brock Purdy, right? Oh, probably the most important takeaway of all, by the way, was that Brock Purdy did not have a traditional Tommy John surgery, just like Javonte Williams did not have the traditional multi-ligament sequence of surgeries and recoveries that happened simultaneously. Those are important takeaways that help explain the fast recoveries of Brock Purdy and Javonte Williams. And yet another takeaway is this, that you're not going to get a goddamn thing from Kadarius Toney for the rest of his career. Enjoy that one game he had as a rookie where he had like 150 yards. That was like that one blip, that one light in the sky, and then that's a wrap. That's it, right? I mean, have you seen enough with Kadarius Toney? You're like, this guy can never get back on the field after he's been hurt, to an extent that he's extending all of these injury recoveries weeks past where they should go. At some point, you, as a medical professional, are like, this guy doesn't actually want to be out there. He's more comfortable in the training room than he is on the field, right?
Yeah, well, I would never say that about an NFL player. Anybody who's willing to go out there and take those hits, I can't really argue with them.
You respect him too much. I do too. We respect him too
But
much. That's right.
yeah, a lot of respect here.
A
But
lot of respect.
with that being said, Kadarius Toney, he had the recent surgery that averages about a 6 week return without much of a performance hit by week 8. So
For
week one
most
will be 7
players.
weeks for most players.
Most
So
players.
so week one will be 7 weeks after that injury. The data would say Kadarius Toney likely out there, likely playing at a high level
Number one
relative to his
receiver on the
baseline.
Chiefs. You got to go get him. He's not being drafted high enough. Make sure you get all the Kadarius Toney you could possibly hold on your roster, man.
But you're right. When you see a guy who's been out, missed that much time, it's hard to, despite what the recent injury says, it's hard to go in on him. So I'm not necessarily picking him up. I do love Sky Moore there too. So that's where I'm going with Chiefs wide receiver shares.
Kadarius Toney is one of those catastrophic Henry Ruggsian busts from the first round. We're going to see it again with Quentin Johnston this year. There's always one guy every year where it's just like, wait, I can't believe that guy went in the first round. He barely saw the field. He can't play football. He doesn't want to be out there. All these things. There's always one guy. And it was Toney one year, Quentin Johnston the next. Now, the most injury-prone player, when you look at running back, look at receiver, look at tight end, who is that guy that you're circling? If you get asked this on like a radio show, this seems like a very radio program, like a real radio. Hey, we got Deepak. Who's the most injury-prone player in the NFL?
Yeah, well, there's a couple guys that I considered for this one, and
Can I
answer
guess?
is going to be
Can I guess?
yeah, please.
Elijah Mitchell.
I did not consider Elijah Mitchell actually.
Okay.
That running back position is just injury prone as a position. So a guy who's going to carry a lot is, especially in the Shanahan offense, going to get injured. The guy who is higher than the rest of the position, at least in our data, is Deebo Samuel, and that is because he carries more than any other wide receiver really. So it's just more chaotic hits by bigger people, and as a result has a higher injury risk. His specific distribution puts him at 20% higher than the baseline wide receiver.
That's right.
But if you look
because he's getting a lot of carries. He basically has the increased
carries.
Injury risk of a running back, which is why he also has the highest injury risk on our Injury Finder app. It's the same concept that you guys are looking at. If you take more hits than other players and you have the injury track record, if it's both things, right? If you're Bijan Robinson, you're coming in fresh and you're young, you can take a few more hits and your injury probability is still going to be lower than, say, a Christian McCaffrey, even if you're taking more hits, right? Because Christian McCaffrey has the age and the injury track record, right? That increases his probability of missing games, right? But when you're Deebo Samuel and you're playing a type of receiver that no one else plays, and you're getting like 20 more carries out of the backfield than any other wide receiver in the NFL, that is going to ratchet up your probability of getting hurt, even if you're coming in to the season with a pristine body, right? No injuries in recent memory and been working out with special trainers and special stretchers and everything else and nutrition and all those things. It's like, hey, man, you're volunteering with your play style to have many more collisions with NFL defenders than any other wide receiver. That's just what the data is going to come back and tell us.
You're exactly right. And it does give him some upside too, production-wise, but that risk for me is why I've been avoiding Deebo Samuel the last 2 years in year-long leagues. The other guys you look at, of course, we talked about OBJ and Michael Thomas. The guy we didn't talk about who could also, any injury could be potentially a career ender is Tua. And you have to really look at him as a guy who, especially any concussion, you're looking at probably a 4-week type of absence at least, rather than the standard 2, just because of how profile everything was last year. And then he's been injured beyond just the concussions. He's been injured about 5 years in a row now. So that's a guy, unfortunately, I really like rooting for Tua because he's had such bad luck with the injuries, but
can't draft him.
He's a guy who I hope he gets the ball out quickly, and I hope that O-line is ready for the challenge.
Sure. Can't draft him.
If you do, you draft him with another guy, but you're taking, at one point in the year, I was in one QB leagues, I was thinking Tua plus Brock Purdy is a nice little combo, but now I think you're kind of losing that discount on Purdy, and Tua doesn't give you that rushing upside, so you need to look elsewhere.
Tua is one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, just in terms of pocket awareness. He takes a lot of blindside hits. It seems like he just doesn't see defenders coming, where Other quarterbacks, they can sniff it out. Tom Brady most famously, but even Tom Brady had that guy crawling on the ground and hitting his knee, and he tore his ACL. Remember that? That was a dirty play. How dirty was that play? Oh,
yeah,
that was
it was
dirty.
also a different
The guy
era.
on the Chiefs, who was that?
I don't know who made the tackle, but you're right. It was not what you want to see, a blindside hit, but it's exactly like we're talking about with Stafford and with any other QB with a bad O-line, is that you got to get the ball out quick, and even when you do, those hits rack up.
Yeah, I can't believe it. People are in the chat asking us how we feel about Dobbins. He's activated. It was a fake injury all along. We reported this weeks ago. He's fine. He's had plenty of time to recover. The contract negotiations are clearly going well because he's now reporting for duty. He's been a value for weeks. You should have been drafting him then. He's going to pop 1 to 2 rounds for, all the wrong reasons, just by people not paying attention and not knowing what the hell was actually going on behind the scenes. Like, oh, he's on the PUP. He's on the PUP. I can't draft this guy. He has PUP next to his name in my draft room. I don't want to draft him right now. He's injured. I don't like drafting injured players this early. Having no idea what was really going on. Deepak knew what was going on. I knew what was going on. And we were drafting J.K. Dobbins and will continue to.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.